You are a man. Shut the fuck up.
Nigga, do you got something you want to say?
Don't worry about me, I'm a boss.
The Rev Festival's finale is one of Red Velvet's worst Velvet concepts to date. Even when the era began, I was very confused at the direction of where it was going. Back then, I was still a baby Rev. I had joined the fandom in 2018 with Really Bad Boy, so around that point I was hitting my first year with Red Velvet. 4 years later, exploring the rich world Red Velvet has offered and becoming more educated on design, I think I could finally speak on all the issues I have with the finale. Of course, when it was rolling out, I found a lot to love and cherish, but hindsight is 20/20, so hopefully no one will find my opinions offensive. To begin this discussion and get a full understanding of my critique concerning the art direction of the finale, we first need to break down Red Velvet's concept at its core. Red Velvet is one of the few K-pop acts whose concept is actually featured in the band's name itself. The group's discography and thus accompanying visual work is split into two sections: Red and Velvet. The red side could be described as the longest fever dream you'd ever have. Quirky in nature, the red side is jam-packed with bubblegum pop music that sometimes speak of wonderland adventures beyond this reality. Upbeat, cute and bright are adjectives well suited to describe red concepts. It's meant to feel sugary sweet, which is also why you could find sweet, sugary desserts sprinkled all throughout their red side cinematography, photography and even discography. The ridiculous, outlandish nature of the red side is often where Red Velvet's fairy tale feel crashes in. It's also worth noting that the cutesy charm of their red side is not to be taken at face value, oftentimes having sinister meanings behind bright, colorful visuals. Take Russian Roulette for example, a red concept with colorful cinematography reminiscent of Wes Anderson's work. However, the entire music video is inspired by the harsh violence displayed in old retro cartoons, which the girls act out towards each other. The Velvet side is mature, sophisticated and more rooted in reality. R&B, jazz and soulful hooks come together to create an intimate atmosphere for their Velvet tracks. Opposed to Red, Velvet pings back and forth between aesthetically pleasing and slightly terrifying. Most of their Velvet works feature horror references or elements meant to enhance the creepy, unsettling nature. When slightly whimsical visual work is featured in Velvet, it's meant to represent escapism, which is a part of our reality. It ties their red side in neatly overall while still feeling more familiar to our world. Velvet tracks are often accompanied with lingering shots, more clever transitions, mature and often darker clothing and or muted shades, as well as heavier, flavorful foods. With both sides, Red Velvet showcases a versatility many would fail to pull off, let alone blend together and still feel cohesive, as their Rev Festival series have shown. They've put forth a career's worth of content that is comparable to biting into a sweet, yet rich dessert. Beginning from 2018, Red Velvet would start to blend their two sides, often seen as opposites, and create harmony within. This could be seen with 2018's The Perfect Red Velvet, Really Bad Boy and finally the Rev Festival series. While the first two was more experimental in its approach to merge, the Rev Festival is intentional with its weaving of both Red and Velvet in sound. Each body of work is meant to be a balance between the two in different ways. Despite this blend though, each comeback still is identified at its bare bones with one side. For the finale, Psycho is a Velvet concept. Not only that, it's Red Velvet's first Velvet concept since 2018. This is significant due to 2018 being the last year NINI'S, former art director and graphic designer of SM Entertainment, worked for the company and therefore the group. For better or for worse, NINI'S brought her personal love for many things to Red Velvet, one of which being her love for horror. Carefully, she managed to build a creepy, mysterious yet visually immersive world for Red Velvet's Velvet content, while referencing horror franchises and practically carving Red Velvet's horror into a niche of their own. The best example of this would of course be the iconic Perfect Velvet, an album advertised as a movie about a cult of 5 girls sacrificing pizza men every full moon. It's no surprise that her last project for the group, Really Bad Boy, was a homage to the campy horror cinema of the 80s. It was an appropriate send-off, which was unfortunately followed up with what I believe to be their worst velvet concept and thus comeback to date. With Minheejin's absence called for another horror buff to step in her role and showcase Red Velvet's dark yet passionate velvet side through interesting, meaningful and creepy visuals. The art direction of the finale tries to, but that is the issue. It tries, instead of just doing it. The finale feels like a cheap imitation of what Red Velvet has already successfully mastered. We've got an equally creepy yet unique photography of the girls together that are meant to exude occult energy. With the Velvet, we get this neat action shot of the girls running around Wendy. Don't even get me started on the group shots for Perfect Velvet. I could just throw any group shot from that era on the screen with 10 minutes of silence and you'd feel the emotions through the pictures. However, the finale's cult group lineup is painfully stale. Blank stares and boring, drab I just killed my husband attire. Other than the shot of them holding hands together in a circle, there isn't anything impressive here to Red Velvet's standards. For example, in Perfect Velvet, the girls wear bold bright red outfits which contrast nicely against the white building as well as the green grass. It's intentional in its intensity. Just because this is a Velvet concept doesn't mean everything has to be dull, predictable and dark. Speaking of predictable, out goes the gorgeous sequences and leather that Perfect Velvet gave us and NINI'S, generic horror bridesmaid white dresses. It feels like the costume design for a modern-day horror movie trying to disguise itself as a period piece. The simplicity of the styling only makes the location and set details even worse, if you could even call them set details. A lantern, a chair from someone's yard sale, an old TV and a dream is what we have to work with here. Hardly anything compared to Really Bad Boys' clever set mania, automatic styling table, the Velvet's candles or Perfect Velvet's literally everything. Somehow someway, the finale, despite being years older than all, is even more stripped back with no visual story to tell despite supposedly being a celebration of all four. The biggest crime of all is that there are absolutely not a single interesting shot in this batch of photos. No interesting angles, the lighting doing most of the heavy work but in the end failing miserably to save the uncreativity wreaking havoc on this art direction. I didn't bother bringing up the location of a forest because I felt many ideas and interesting photography could have come from that but sadly it was pissed away. Also don't even get me started on those video teasers of them, I've never seen an absolute waste of time in 20 seconds. If you think that's bad, you're forgetting that it got worse. Look out pink tape, here comes the Rev Festival finale. Now, I have two speculations as to why they went this route for the final concept. The first is that as the finale was stupidly made a repackage, they remembered last minute that they might need to tie the red side in with the art direction so it wasn't jarring. A failed attempt by the way. The second speculation is simply that this was the last of what they could do with the budget provided. It's not exactly hush-hush that projector photography, while being beautiful in aesthetics, are somewhat of a cheat code budget-wise in K-pop. It looks beautiful, it's quicker to shoot and edit and it's cheap to get done. Most times the in-house staff could take care of most of the labor involving it. Knowing SM and their history of limited funding concerning projects at times, I'm inclined to believe both could be sadly true. I think the inclusion of this version is made worse with how rare Velvet concepts are for Red Velvet as a whole. Out of the 17 releases they've had since debut, only 7, including Psycho, were Velvet concepts. Now take into account that the Perfect Red Velvet, Really Bad Boy and the finale are meant to be fusions of the two sides rather than just one, that truly only leaves 4 out of the 7 to be true Velvet in nature. Each Velvet concept is gaped between red ones as well, increasing the rarity of full Velvet projects as well. For every 2 red concepts a year, there's only been 1 Velvet, with the Perfect Red Velvet and Really Bad Boy being the first ever exceptions. Velvet concepts will never be shelled out in a 2x2 basis the way their red projects are, which is fine. They're red concepts, and therefore by design, red songs are more marketable in South Korea compared to their Velvet work, which sometimes fluctuates with popularity despite being adored overseas. This is not to say every red comeback was a success with the Korean market, but if you compare the success of each side by side, you could begin to see where the company is coming from with their 2-to-1 red to Velvet ratio. I personally don't agree with it. I see no point in having a group with 2 sides if you're going to only push one more than the other, but I see where they're coming from. If this is the case though, this should mean that the Velvet concepts are given proper projects for the art direction to be fully fleshed out, as they are only given one project a year. While I could see the budget being put to good use during their older Velvet works, the finale shoots that right in the knee. The creativity is lacking in ways that not even a somewhat low budget could justify. A lot that should have been edited in post to visually enhance the concept pictures, just weren't in comparison to Perfect Velvet. They utilize NINI'S tactic of collage editing, but only in the photo book, poorly done might I add. This is comparable to something I could throw together in PixArt right now. There's sadly nothing clever or even visually appealing here. The execution is terrible. The only visual work I loved, thinking it was going to lead into something more, was the first poster about the finale. The muted shade of green, the Rev Festival logo taking its final form in fireworks, and the thin, neat typography of Blaze Types APOC set my expectations for the following work to be high. Instead I was handed disappointment on a silver platter. I will say that I did enjoy the tracklist being narrated by Wendy as she told us the story of Rev traveling through the festival. It was stupid and funny. It also tied in the storybook theme, which explained why the medium of album cover went from 3D to 2D. Many disliked this change, and unfortunately I'd have to agree. Don't take this as me belittling 2D art. I love it, and it has always been present in Red Velvet's work, whether that be in the photo books or even promotional posters for their concerts. I think everyone's grudge is more so that it feels jarring. If you have one visual style, stick with it rather than abruptly changing the format at the end. But hands down, my biggest gripe with the finale is that it could have been so much more. This was when I began to see a dip in Sims storytelling altogether. The entire rollout, including music video for Psycho, felt like it was trying to hint at this overarching storyline that was never followed through with. Which is made even funnier by Wendy narrating a story, but that story being a completely different story than the one being, or trying to be, should I say, shown in the visual work. Like I'm crying. Two entirely different storylines going on at the same time, only one being fully acknowledged yet very rushed, may I add, and the other not being fleshed out whatsoever. What's going on? Also, going back to what I just pointed out, the whole festival being from Rev's perspective was rushed as hell because it had to be presented to us at the end. Even though I enjoyed it, it's essentially flawed from the beginning, as we had to sit through like 14 fucking tracks we already goddamn heard, with the narration element being the new factor. It's too repetitive, unfortunately. Psycho as a music video reflects its rollout, generic and boring. Beautiful shots, but visually meaningless for the most part. The story shown is hardly as interesting as their previous Velvet tales, despite, and I have to keep reminding the audience, that this is supposed to be a celebration of Velvet altogether. The horror tropes featured are not only few and in between, they are made sadly due to the pace and editing. There are moments that go on for entirely too long in Psycho, then scenes that should be more impactful fall flat because they happen so quick. That scene of Solgi turning around in the mirror should be frightening, but it's shrug-worthy at best. Also, the entire music video just feels too clean and too bright as a whole. Like the Velvet concepts from before was giving electricity was not paid, and this comeback was gonna be the thing to fund the bills. That intimate, fuzzy, moody, shot on film feel. Psycho feels like a never-ending commercial. Like this set is too clean, every single light in the universe is on. This is too pristine, nobody in this universe knows pain. It's hard to get invested in the feelings the girls do showcase throughout the music video because the atmosphere doesn't match what they're expressing. For all its glamour, Psycho feels empty, but not in the clever, intentional way that Automatic was. The finale, while beautiful to most gay pop group standards, is empty and practically soulless in the large world Red Velvet has carved for themselves. With the 2021 follow-up of Queendom feeling like a generic version of their Red work, I was beginning to worry that the authentic visual identity belonging to Red Velvet may be lost. To my delight, the reopening of the festival Feel My Rhythm laid these nagging thoughts to rest. With that being said, I believe the finale is not only the worst part of the festival by far, but also their worst Velvet work. Not including the hot mess that was Bloom from this year, but you do recall me saying that the most frustrating part was what it could be? Well, my strawbesties, let's step into my office and get a look into my mind as to how I felt the festival should have ended. If the concert for this accompanying era was entitled La Rouge and they performed song with said title at said concert, I could not, for the life of me, understand why La Rouge wasn't picked to be the title. While Psycho tiptoes between Velvet and Red in sound, Laurel gives True Velvet in all its glory. The girls sound amazing on this track, with no nonsensical raps. Yeri and Irene showcase beautiful deeper tones that are far more respectable than just shouting random English words mid-song. This doesn't even begin to delve into how gorgeous this song sounds live, adding to this very burlesque show feel. Yes, Psycho became an international hit, managing to somehow beat out Bad Boy, but La Rogue would have been a better way to celebrate their Velvet side, as it was smoother, more relaxed yet sensual, like one of those nights in Automatic. They would get to have their cake and eat it too, with this Velvet track being well suited for a choreo and like some, cough. I'm looking at you, cool hot sweet love. I also feel like La Rouge would have made a better case for the popular critique of Red Velvet concerning their choreography and stage presence. All of the girls shine so well during the choreo, and it's complex enough that it shows their massive improvement. Rather than Psycho, in which the girls themselves have admitted that the choreo suited Seulgi well more than them. It shows by the way Irene's neck is practically screaming from even having to move an inch during the chorus. I also feel like La Rogue would have been easier to tie in more horror themes, let alone an actual goddamn plot in the music video. Make the music video's location be in a hotel rather than this abandoned looking mansion. I'm personally not a fan of horror, so I can't be help in that department to help immerse you in my vision, but I could guarantee that even hearing a hotel themed Red Velvet comeback, your mind is racing with possibilities. It would also tie in the girls' festival positions to the finale better, with Wendy holding the tickets to the burlesque-inspired show that's taking place inside the hotel, Joy being the bellhop. Like, do you see how we could have had more? The concept pictures would feature them in the hotel, like I'm seeing Perfect Velvet meets Automatic. You have to meet me down the rabbit hole here. I know the main critique of La Rogue being considered as a title over Psycho is that Psycho is more upbeat and catchy, but where exactly did that get us? Lazy, half-baked generic visuals that are located in the dreams of a snail. With La Rouge, they could go the thriller route and have it be a slow build-up. Also, no other group would ever put out a song like One of Those Nights as a title track, so really what's the difference with La Rogue? Not to mention we already had gotten 2 upbeat Velvet tracks already the year before. Like, no one would die if this one was more of a callback to their earlier Velvet titles. I made this video mainly because people were expecting me to do an art direction breakdown of the finale, as I've done day 1 and day 2, both days of which I love. I just couldn't find it in myself to break it down because I dislike it so much, even more in hindsight. Even their recent Japanese comeback, Wildside, which is meant to be their first Japanese Velvet concept, feels off. I still enjoyed the Ocean 8's theme, beautiful set design, but once again, a complete lack of storytelling whatsoever with nothing but beauty shots. Compare this to Cookie Jar and it's looking troubling. I don't even want to break into 2020's Monster. That era single-handedly being the base that launched the Kwangye-verse will forever make my head spin. It does seem like things are on the up and up though, with Seulgi's solo set to be jam-packed with story, references, intriguing visual work and even more interesting sound design. I was hoping that Red Velvet would come back for Halloween, but this has left me even more excited. As her solo seems to be a success even before release, I'm hoping that their team uses that as a launching pad for another Velvet concept. A proper one. Horror themes and R&B music. Don't piss me off.
Who fuck is it?
You're expecting funny morals from hate.
It's over. That's it. Okay? That's all I gotta say.